All right, we're going to pick up here where we left off last Sunday. We have been talking about the intertestament period, the time between the testaments. When you go to your Old Testament and you read about certain things that are happening within the Old Testament, and then you go to the New Testament and we find that it's a lot different area, or a lot different kind of terms, and there's different things going on, and we find that, well, the Bible doesn't really help us in going between the testaments there of what was happening. But what we find through secular history and some of the writers of that time, we find the things that were happening in between. And it is beneficial to the Bible student when we go through here. I think through studying the intertestament period, you have a better understanding of the New Testament anyway. And it kind of helps answer some of the questions that maybe you kind of always had in the back of your mind and thought, well, I'm not sure why this is what it is, but we just take the Bible and say, well, that's all right. Maybe we'll figure it out one of these days. But we're going to figure it out today. All right, or through this study. Probably not today. But anyway, all right, what we have on the PowerPoint on the screen right now is the Assyrian Empire. We talked about Assyria, that they were the empire of the known world at that time. You can see their territory going from over here. That's right there beneath Babylon. We think about Abram leaving there, the Chaldeans, Babylonians. We hear that term kind of used a lot, however you want to pronounce that. But anyway, Babylon right up there. And what we have is this Fertile Crescent, this area following the Euphrates and Tigris River. Their kingdom coming through that. They did not go across Arabia because that's just desert. But they move up through the Euphrates and Tigris River, dropping down into Israel, down into Egypt. So when we read First, Kings, 1st, 2nd Kings, and 1st, 2nd Chronicles, when we read that, and we're talking about Assyria, this is where we have to find ourselves. Now, interesting, I don't know if you can see the PowerPoint there, the Nineveh. That's where Jonah was told to go up and preach. Interestingly enough, Tarshish is way over here. It's like right where Spain and Africa meet. It's like way over here. So he was going in the total opposite direction of where he was supposed to go to preach at Nineveh. But that's where he was supposed to go, the capital of Assyria. So when we're reading that, we understand these were the people that were in control, because now you go to the New Testament and Rome is in control. So how do we get to Rome? We're going to get there. So here's another view. Again, you can still see even Tarshish is even farther than that. So here we have Babylonia, or Babylon, the empire of Babylon. We find that they rose up when we looked at the image that Nebuchadnezzar is going to have: the head of gold, the chest of silver, the legs of bronze, and then the feet of iron and clay. We find that these empires are coming. Babylon was the head of gold. So Babylon came in and destroyed the Assyrian nation with some help of some other nations, but Babylon really took hold. So we see them going down even into the Nile, going down into Africa. So their kingdom was quite expansive. So last week we talked about Babylon, we talked about Nebuchadnezzar, and those individuals at the end of 2 Kings. We find those individuals being talked about coming in and destroying the temple, they carry the people away in 3 waves there in Jerusalem. So Babylon is responsible for that, and this is where we find the individuals being dropped out. Interestingly enough, this is Assyria. Going back to that, the Samaritans, we remember and recall that they would take captives from all over these areas and bring them and deport them and bring them and intermingle. So again, the Samaritans, that's why the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans, because they were taken from all of these areas, all these different religious backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, and dropped into Samaria, into Israel, the northern kingdom. So Babylon, we find them being the superpower. But last week we finished talking about Medo-Persia. So the idea of Media and Persia, they're going to come together. We talked about Cyrus, that he's going to reunite these 2 kingdoms. And you see the vastness now of the empire stretching over into Asia, towards India, coming down. Again, not really having any dealings with Arabia. They're the desert. Then they drop down the Jordan, going to the Nile River, even going up over here into the Mediterranean Sea. So this Medo-Persian Empire expands itself even more. Now, this is important. I feel like my batteries may have kicked the bucket there. I got some right here. Perfect. positive, negative on the right side. All right. Maybe not. These may be the dead ones you took out of there, Brad. I don't know. That's coming on now for a little bit, maybe, but it's blinking. Probably not. Sir? Okay, I'm on. We'll see how long it lasts. It'll probably go out here in a minute. But we'll see how long it lasts. Okay. Yeah, Brad's going to get some more. Good deal. All right, so now what we're looking at, again, Medo-Persia, we're looking at, again, this colossal image, the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver. This is Medo-Persia. When you read Daniel and you read about the bear that's represented, he's raised up on one side, he's got 3 ribs in his mouth, that is Medo-Persia. Right? He's stronger on one side because there's 2 nations, Media and Persia is going to end up being stronger, and Persia is going to be the nation. So what we find there is, we say, all right, he's raised up on one side because he's stronger. When you read in Daniel as well, when you read about the ram that's at the river, and we're going to talk about it here a little bit more today to refresh your memory, but when we talk about the ram that has 2 horns, the horns being power, one horn being higher than the other, and he's about to meet a he-goat that has a prominent horn, one horn. So that horn that we're going to talk about and what we're going to be discussing there today is that of Greece. I'll swap out some batteries here. Very good. Thank you, Brad. Oh, yeah. I'm going to put them right here. We'll see how long it plays out. We'll just run them on out until we have to swap them. All right, so Greece is the next nation that's going to arise out of this. So again, when we're looking through, when we looked at the colossal image, the head of gold was Babylon, the feet, the legs were going to be Rome. So the Old Testament we have Babylon, the New Testament we have Rome, so everything in between is what's happening in this 400 years. So around the year 340 BC, Philip II of Macedonia. So when you hear of Macedonia, we'll look at a map here and just, let me see if I can point it. When you're looking at Macedonia, you're really looking more north of Greece. So when Paul, when he's going to preach, he hears the Macedonian call. That's what he's talking about. I think we sing a song about the Macedonian call. But anyway, he's talking about, here's Jerusalem down here, talking about going up into this area and preaching the gospel. That man in the vision says, come here, we want to hear the gospel. So he's going to go to Macedonia. So that's where we find the beginning of Greece, the Greeks there, Macedonia. Now, notice this individual. Philip II and his queen, Olympias, would have a son, Alexander III, also known as Alexander the Great. So you can't talk about Greek culture without talking about Alexander the Great. What a great, we don't have the time. I'm going to try not to get too bogged down with some of the things, but if that stuff interests you, I would highly suggest you go and research and read about this man. A very interesting character through Scripture or through the history, and we hear about him in Scripture being again the legs of bronze, the legs of bronze coming in, and then again the he-goat that's going to come that is talked about in Scripture. We're going to get in a little bit more of that here in just a minute. But it's interesting to think about Alexander's upbringing because his mother, Olympias, she would ingrain in him from a very early age, she would teach him that he was not exactly the son of Philip II, but that he was actually the son of the Grecian god Zeus. And he was a descendant from Hercules. So you have a boy growing up and you're telling him, hey, you're a half god because Zeus was your father and Hercules, he was also your ancestor. Well, I'm sure it probably got in his head, it seemed like it did anyway, because Alexander went out and he conquered. Now we looked at, again, the area here, we'll note here in just a minute, the area that the Medo-Persians conquered, but here in a minute just look at what Alexander conquered. But what we're going to find is that he was taught by Aristotle, yes, the same Aristotle that you are thinking about. So he's going to spread this Greek culture, Hellenism, to the known world. Now, let me interject right here. What we have from these 3 nations so far is what we're getting from Babylon. We're getting this conquering nation that's going to be expanding and going through here, and then through the Medo-Persians. What we find is a set of laws that say that you can't change anything. So when we go back to Esther, when the Bible student is reading over Esther, what is told there? Haman, he's going to go out, he's going to have decreed that order to kill all the Jews And what do they say? We can't change it, right? Once the law has been set in place, we can't change anything. So Mordecai, they said, well, we got to make a new law that the Jews can defend themselves. So that's what we find. So what we get from that is that we have, all right, the Medo-Persians gave us a system for the nation, for the world to say once you make a law, the law is binding. Now what we're going to get through Greece is a universal language. So the Hellenistic culture is everything Greek. Everything's Greek. Everything's Greek. All of these, they're pushing this type of culture to everybody. And what we find then is that the known world at that time will be talking in Greek. Now that wasn't the only language of the day, but that was the universal language, was Koine or common Greek. That's what your New Testament is written in. Obviously we have the English translation, but when you go back to the manuscripts, when you go back to those letters, they were written in Koine Greek, and that's why it's great, because that language hasn't changed, and we can go back and it means what it means when you go back and read it. So, look at the vastness of this empire now, right? You have it going all the way down, all the way into Asia over here, into bordering India, all the way up into, again, obviously Greece, Macedonia, going up into Asia Minor, down into Egypt, Alexandria, down there in Egypt. So we find this vast nation now. And what they're going to be talking about, or what they're going to be using, the language that they use is Greek. So this is monumental, because what we find that in, I believe it's in Galatians 4, in the fullness of time that Christ came, he came at the perfect time. Because Babylonian gave us this rule, right? This nation that's going to rule, kind of a collective empire. Medo-Persia, we've got a set of laws that we're binding. In Greece, we have a universal language. And in Rome, we're going to have peace and a road system. So it's amazing when we get into that Christ really did come at the perfect time to preach, for the gospel to be preached. So what we find here, right? The empire of Greece. Like, again, look at that kingdom. Now, so let's go, again, for the Bible student, what's important about this, let's go to Daniel chapter 2, verse 39 first. So really, we're studying Daniel, I guess, through a lot of this stuff. He's going to be talking about a lot of them. So if you've ever read Daniel and got through some of that stuff, you think, man, I don't know what Daniel's talking about. Well, we're going to talk about it today. Daniel chapter 2, again, noticing there, in verse 39, Daniel chapter 2, And after these shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass. So this is Greece, which shall bear rule, notice, over all the earth. And Greece just about did that. I mean, that's pretty much it. Was the known world at that time. He did bear rule over all of that. So that's not the only place we hear about this. In Daniel chapter 7. Flip over with me a few pages. Daniel chapter 7. Looking there in verse 6. Now again, these visions, we're going to see this beast. Verse 4 of chapter 7, we're going to see a lion, which represents Babylon. In verse 5, we see a bear. Again, Medo-Persia, raised up on one side, 3 ribs. The nations that they conquered, Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. And verse 6, notice, after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now, we're going to get into the 4 wings and the 4 heads here in just a minute. The best one, I think, as we look in chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8. Again, all of these lining up, and we're actually going to get told here in Daniel chapter 8 that this is who we're talking about. So you don't have to be like, well, I don't know if Ben's right. I'll show you with the Bible that I am. Anyway, all right, so Daniel chapter 8, looking there in verse 5, notice... As Daniel speaks at the beginning of that, verse 3, we find the ram. I talked about that at the introduction, Medo-Persia, the ram. He has 2 horns in verse 3 of Daniel chapter 8. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last, so Persia comes up last. Now notice this, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Now the beasts were representative of nations. So when we looked back at Medo-Persia, notice we're coming out of this area over here. The Bible says that he's going to push westward. So this is this way. He's going to go north, and he's going to go south. So no nation is able to stand before him. All right? So this is talking about Medo-Persia there. Notice but he did according to his will and became great. Now, verse 5, and as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west. Now, where's Greece? To the west. Of where? Persia, Media, over here. There's a he-goat. He's coming from the west. Notice, and on the face of the whole, or let's say he came forth from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. Alexander the Great, he was 33 years old when he died. He conquered that whole area that we were talking about before he died at the age of 33. So the idea of touching not the ground, the swiftness of Alexander the Great. Notice, and the he-goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So the nation of Greece, who's that notable horn? Alexander the Great. Now, and he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. So here's Alexander conquering Medo-Persia. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler, or anger, against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of the hand. No one could deliver Medo-Persia from Greece. Alexander the Great was conquering the known world. Look at verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Now this is important. When he was strong, the great horn was broken. So Alexander the Great, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of the heaven. Now we're going to talk about these four horns. And we're going to talk about that, and then even in verse 9, the little horn that comes up out of that. So if you're curious about who the little horn is, you think, I don't even know what you're talking about. We're going to get there. So bear with me. It's exciting. I hope you're excited to get through this stuff. I am. But anyway, so the great horn, this is talking about Greece. Now, how do I know that? How do you know that, Ben? Well, look at verse 21 of chapter 8. And the rough goat is the king of Greece. There you go. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So who's the first king of Greece? Alexander the Great. There you go. So hold me to what I'm saying there, I guess. I don't know about that. That's what he means. Again, notice in verse 20, the having the two horns, the ram with the two horns is the kings of Media and Persia. So there you go. So no need to get bogged down with that and say, this is something happening in 2024, 2025. No, this has all happened before. Now, let's look at Alexander the Great, and let's look at some prophecies concerning that. Again, this is a prophecy, and we're going to come back to that here in just a moment. But here's one that's pretty exciting, I think. I used to teach this to the young people when we were talking about prophecies in the Bible and things like that. So sometimes when you're reading the Bible, you hear of a place called, or places called Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon. So these cities, you can see Israel down here at the bottom, and you have Tyre and Sidon going up the coast. Now, you can't see it real good in this, but that little blowed up square, maybe you can see it, a little island outside the edge of the coast. So you have this island that's just going to be right off the coast of this, of Phoenicia there, of Tyre. Now, what does that mean to anybody studying the Bible? Let's look at this. This is great. Let's go to Daniel. We're right there, or Ezekiel. We're right there at Daniel. Flip back to Ezekiel 26. Let's notice a prophecy concerning Tyre. And I think it's great when we go through this. Talking about, again, Ezekiel writing this even before he was carried away with Babylonian rule. He's laying there he's with the captives there in the river Kibar. So he is with the captives. He's writing this about not Babylon, not Medo-Persia, but about Greece. That's going to be coming. Notice in Ezekiel chapter 26, we won't read the whole 21 verses, but especially notice verse 4. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyrus, or Tyre, and break down, again, this is the Old Testament, so the wording is a little different from the Greek and the New, because they translated your English from the Hebrew. They translated the New Testament from the Greek, so that's why the wording's a little different. And break down her towers. Notice what I really want to get out of this is, I will also scrape her dust from her and make her like the top of a rock. So this is the prophecy concerning Tyre, the city of Tyre. Now what's going to happen is, as you continue reading in verse 7, that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come in and destroy Tyre. He's going to destroy that city. But what they essentially do is they just pack up and go to this island. That was actually a defense that they would use in that city, that when they were under attack, they would just go out to the island and they were safe out there. And that was kind of an escape route that they would go. So Babylon comes and marches against them. He destroys Tyre, so the people go out to this island of Tyre. Now, here's what we're looking at right there. The island city of Tyre. Again, here's the coast, this green. But you'll kind of notice Alexander the Great, he comes up and he's going to defeat Tyre. Well, they're out there on this island, and he's like, how am I going to get out there to meet this city and defeat this city? What Alexander the Great does is he takes the rubble, the buildings, everything from Tyre, the ancient city there, and pushes it into the ocean and causes a causeway and creates a causeway, a levee essentially, to get to the island city of Tyre. Now, think about what those people were going through. Here's this king of Greece. He's coming to march against the city. Hey, we're out here in this island. We're not worried about him. But what is he getting at? The fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel 26, that Tyre is going to be scraped from the dust and make her like the top of a rock. He said the whole city, it's laying in ruin. Alexander the Great comes in and pushes all of that old city into the ocean and creates a causeway. Now you'll see here this brown, this light brown, the present coastline. When you look at Tyre now, there it is. There's the island and there's the coast. But because of Alexander the Great pushing that causeway over there, the shore kind of created itself, and it just kind of formed itself, stuff getting the sand and stuff like that, so it makes this coastline. So that's amazing, because what we're finding is the prophecy concerning this all the way back to Ezekiel's day, that Alexander the Great was going to scrape Tyre off just like a rock. And that's essentially what he did. So very fascinating, the prophecies in the Bible. All right, now, again, because then you go back to that book about if you got one prophecy correct, what the odds were of doing that. And we see so many through the Bible being told. So now, after defeating Tyre, and he moves on down into the Gaza area, now notice this. He sets his sights and his army toward Jerusalem. Now it's important that we note that Jerusalem, he was going to attack Jerusalem. He was going to destroy it. He was kind of going to make Jerusalem as this image and this example and say, all right, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to treat you like Jerusalem. So it's essentially what he's going to try to do. But when you look back at that, God hadn't, the people had came back. They had been building on the city. We don't really hear of any, because God's not speaking, we don't have any recordings of the Jews really being evil and idolatrous. The Babylonian captivity kind of kept them from doing that. So what we find is the high priest, Jaddua, he is going to hear about Alexander the Great coming, and he doesn't know what to do. So again, for time's sake, we can't go through that. But what essentially he does is he's praying to God, and the whole city's praying to God. They're like, we don't know what to do. And we'll come to find out, God reveals to them, or at least that's what the tradition holds, is that God speaks to Jaddua, and he tells him just open the gates and dress up and invite him in. And that's exactly what happens. Interestingly enough, Alexander the Great records that he had a dream, that that's kind of the way it was going to be, and that he says that should spare the city. So what they do is they open up the gates of Jerusalem. Everybody's in their priestly apparel. The people are in white, and you have this great army march up to this, and they're essentially out here. Here's the welcome party coming into Jerusalem. And because of this great show, Alexander spares the city. Now it's interesting, because what happens is they go in and they begin to talk to Alexander the Great, and they actually go back to Daniel in the prophecies there, and they say, see, this is what's going to happen. You were supposed to do this. You will eventually defeat Medo-Persia. So that's interesting to me, that they would show him this. Again, they went back right where we went to Daniel, saying, look, you're the next king. You're going to be coming, and you're going to defeat the Persians. So eventually, there in 331, Alexander overtook the Persians. So again, the he-goat, he destroys the ram. But again, by 332, so what we have here is a 33-year-old man. He goes back to Babylon, and he dies of unknown causes. So it's interesting. I can't remember the historian that said that about him, but though the world couldn't contain him, right, he was able to conquer the known world, a coffin did back in Babylon. So interesting, the powerful man, but death is the great equalizer nonetheless. So what we're going to find here is Alexander the Great. He is going to have this massive kingdom, and he's going to do exactly what the Bible said he would do, prophesying for him to do that. But what we find is, we don't have the time, we won't get in, I'm just going to kind of talk to you about this, is what's going to happen to his kingdom. So what we find next, and what we're going to be talking about, Lord willing, next Sunday, and why it's important to the Bible student, is with the death of Alexander, there was no clear heir to the throne. So he was asked, to whom would you leave his kingdom, or to whom would he leave his kingdom to? He replied, to the strongest. So what we're going to find when you go back to Daniel chapter 8 there, talking about that horn being broke into four, what we're going to find is that initially there are 7 men. They're going to be generals, they're going to be friends, and they're going to be trying to overtake this vast kingdom and be the king. But what we find is eventually they find themselves, really there's just 4 of them, and we find 4 different kingdoms that are going to be taking place here around the area. So there's only going to really be 2 of them that we will be talking about next week. We're going to be talking about the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So these 2 nations are going to come out, and we're going to go through those men that are going to try to take this nation. But when we get through that, again, 2 is going to be important for us for Bible students. 1, the Ptolemy down in Egypt, he's going to be important with orchestrating the Septuagint, or what we would call the LXX. Again, remember that map, the Greek culture going down into Africa, into Egypt, and we find that they have a library down there, and they say, hey, everybody speaks Greek, we need a Greek translation of the Old Hebrew, the Old Testament, which the Bible, they would say the New Testament wasn't there yet. So they say, all right, we're going to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And they took 70 translators, and there's a lot of fictional stories behind that they went off in separate places, translated it, and they all came back, and they were all accurate. I don't think that really happened, but it's interesting to think about. But anyway, nonetheless, what they did was they had people that could speak Greek, people that could speak Hebrew, and they translated the Bible into Greek, again, making it available when Christ is in the temple. When he reads from Scripture, he's reading from the Septuagint. He's reading, or again, LXX is 70, the 70 translators, that's why they call it the LXX. So he's important when it comes to that, and the Seleucids will be important when we get into the Maccabees and the Jewish revolt and the festival of Hanukkah. When we get into that, that'll all be revealed, Lord willing, next week. So what we're going to talk about is the Greece being divided into civil war, and then we'll look at Rome, and we'll kind of get into again some of the stuff that's happening with Herod and the synagogues and things like that. So that's coming down the line a little bit farther, and then we'll do something else when we get to the end of this. So we got a few more lessons on that. Any questions or comments there through any of that I've been going on over?
How long did it take you to push all this stuff? Does it tell to get to that island?
I can't remember. Seems like it's recorded somewhere, Tyler Moss. It may be Josephus, that Jewish historian. He may say how long. It's probably years. You know, usually when they would besiege, maybe you didn't hear that. Tyler Moss was asking how long it took him to push the ruins of Tyre into the sea to capture the island. Usually when they besieged a city, it was several years it would take to do that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they had manpower. Tommy's right. They didn't have those D8s and nothing else going and pushing all that stuff off into the water. They pushed it all off by hand. But he had a massive army. The Greek army was massive. So they were, no doubt, were able to do it. But it probably did. I'll try to figure that out, and we'll kind of see. Because that stuff, but again, I didn't want to get bogged down too much with some of that, but that's a great prophecy that's fulfilled, and amazing that he was able to accomplish that. Anybody else? All right. Well, I hope you're excited for this. I've been enjoying it. So maybe, if again, any question you have afterwards, just let me know. I'll try to do my best to answer that for you. But Lord willing, we'll get in again to the civil war that's happening in Greece, and then on into Rome. So if anybody has nothing else, John will come and lead us in number 27. Again, thank you all for being here this morning. Enjoyed your kind attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time.